many of you probably know this. It's Sophie Wadsworth is here to read some of her poetry, and she has taught creative writing and literature since 1991, and now this is her collection of her poetry, which was awarded the Jessica Bryce Niles Chapman Award. That's quite a mouthful. From and it's basically, I believe, about her grandmother's notes or letters that she wrote back from Siberia, and she's put it into poetic form. And we're very excited that she's here to read some of her poetry to us. After she has done some reading, she will answer questions for you. So please feel free to ask any questions. And then we also would love to have you, if you wish her to sign a copy of the book and you don't have one in your hand, you can purchase one at the desk. They'd be happy to sell it to you, and then come back and have her sign it. And we wish to welcome you. You ready?
Thank you, Benny, for that introduction. And I want to thank also a couple people from the store, John, who originally welcomed me to give a reading, and also Kate Bird, who worked really hard on the publicity and getting me up to speed. I also want to thank my teachers and friends. There's a number of friends here, but I actually don't see any teachers. Well, I shouldn't say that. The students are all teachers. But I've had people along the way who've given me a lot of very helpful advice and encouragement and courage in working on these and other poems. And I just want to thank them, sort of welcome them in spirit into the room, because we all stand on other people's shoulders. And many friends along the way who said, keep going, keep going. So I thought I'd begin with a spring poem, although I'll be mostly reading from Letters from Siberia, which does sound wintry, doesn't it? But this is a poem for those of you who have gardens. I don't know about you, but I'm ready to put all the seeds in this weekend, which the light frost sort of suggests might not be a good idea. But how many people in the room have a compost pile of some kind? Well, so this is for you. And if you don't, maybe after this poem you'll be inspired. Compost. You pull the green pulse, a stew of seed pulp, bruised apples, leaf mold. You embrace in your steaming center hard corn cobs, equally with wilted chard, soft as black-green handkerchiefs, commingling everything into sweet, crumbling soil. Earth soup, where we came from. Soil will melt into terrestrial orgy of worms. You ask only straw or dry leaves to temper the rot. Lightness layered with plenty of rain. Proportion, the crux of life. You suffer crows pecking your skin. Generous, you welcome every failure. Invite the worst loaves of bread, heavy as sad irons. Receive the burnt soup or fetid potato like a monk, giving gold to any who scorn him. Forever becoming something else, yet you are yourself, exactly. Raw, hot at the core, black at bottom. Now, a year of deadness surges, all green and sugar, into the teeth of the corn. So we'll head now to Siberia. and into the voice of my great-grandmother. I'll give a little background just to give you a sense of the overall story. She was born in a small town in southern Maine, Berwick, Maine, in 1868. And she was engaged to her high school sweetheart for 7 years. And they received an invitation from a very adventurous relative after those 7 years. He was casting about looking for steady work. And this relative was, of all things, involved in the fur trade in the Far East and had started a little import-export store in a place called Vladivostok on the Pacific Rim. If you went to Alaska and just kept going west across the Pacific, you vaguely end up in that vicinity, north of Korea, a port city. So he said, I need help in the store, things are going well. Will you join us? And my great-grandparents said, yes, we'll come for 5 years. And I imagine they were going to make their fortune and planning on coming home to get their own farm. And they ended up staying for 36 years until 1930. And the whole time my great-grandmother, her name was Roxy Prey, was writing letters home. I mean, it's hard to imagine in a way, but there wasn't email, there wasn't the telephone. It was the only link with home was writing letters. And she wrote lots of them. And they were saved. And as I read them, I was really moved by the particulars of her life. She was a wonderful writer. And the story of what life was like there. So I decided to put it in poetic form. And they eventually came back to the United States during World War II. I'm happy to answer more questions after reading the poem, but I think I'll just go into the poems. I'll begin, though, with a poem in my voice. I had a dream as I started to read the letters, and I wrote a poem from it, so that's what opens the book. Ancestry Dream. Through a narrow door, I stoop into the muslined room of the dead. Throw kerosene. Flames snap. What to take? Photographs and tintypes. The embroidered tablecloth. Grandma's letters from Siberia. I hurry them under my coat, stumble over stubbled grass. Flames break the window panes. Mother, father, run down the road. No one sees me cross the furrows, slip into a circle of stones. Smell of smoke in the shade. Everything left behind is here. Books, wills, the tarnished ring counted as lost. I gather them into my hands. Feel someone watching me. Ash-haired, is it you, grandmother? Holding the oval mirror between us, eclipsing your face. The glass so bright, I cannot see. So there's some story before they got there, but I think I'll go right to Vladivostok, East Siberia. I try to imagine what it was like for them to be newly married and in this new country and a new job. You know how life is sometimes, everything at once. So this is roughly 1894 in Vladivostok, East Siberia. Learning the language. I lie on the bed in my linen dress, pretending to read a Russian dictionary. Fred is a ship in irons, sails barely flapping as he buttons first one shirt sleeve, then the other. Dinner with the Swedish merchants, another night of corsets and small talk. Now he's at the looking glass, pulling a comb through his mink brown hair, fussing with his collar. Whalebone pinches my ribs. How do you say corset laces in Russian? At the magasin, I tried to ask for a set, but the clerk, nodding sweetly, brought forth a roll of picture wire. Glad Fred can't see me watching. I study his shoulders curve against the shirt seams. A warm draft ruffles my hem until the bed sways like a raft. Listen, I tease. Медленный, slow. Mouj, husband. Очень, very. Красивый, handsome. His back in the lamplight, a sleek black wing. When I clap the dictionary shut, he grins, then scowls. Roxy, look at your dress, wrinkled as newspaper. Never mind, I scowl back, laughing. Красивый муж will be late, очень late, as he smooths the creases in my waist. I mentioned that what got everything started was an import-export business. I think in the beginning it was pretty simple. They exported furs and imported guns. Sounds very American, doesn't it? Supply the guns. And then eventually they progressed to more dry goods. But this, in a way, was the center of their lives, particularly in the early years, before the Russian Revolution, that is. Siberian cat. When Fred calls, "Come see the kitten," I run bareheaded through the snow. One winter in Maine, when the tabby had kittens in my bedroom, I held them, mewling blind, their hearts in my hands. In the half-light of the store, between the rifles and sewing machines, stands no squint-eyed kitten, but a cat. Bigger than a horse, bristling, brush fire, the Siberian tiger. Its fur blazes copper orange, white, black stripes like lightning down its sides. I study its face, refuse to scream. It stares with yellow eyes, but doesn't move. No, frozen, dead, propped up against boxes. When I step closer, a hunter says, "We'll skin it this afternoon. Should bring a good price." Here, everything turns out different than I imagined. I reach the rough fur, lay my hand on the tiger. Strange. Death stalks the edge of town while we get richer. On the floor, bits of snow melt. A dozen beaded eyes hold me upside down, then vanish into the boards. And maybe it is because I'm thinking about spring, but also because it gives a little sense of the distance she was trying to negotiate between Siberia and Maine. I wanted to read a longer poem called The Walnut Tree. Tragically, only, 4 years after they got to Vladivostok, Charlie, the adventurous fur trader, tragically died. He was just 60, which is really, I think, what led them to take the leap and stay as long as they did. Fred, Roxy's husband, took over the store at that time. And just a few years later, Roxy's father died. That was the one time they went home during the 36 years that they were in Siberia. A long trip home. I didn't share the poems in the early going, but weeks by train, as you would imagine, as lots of other people were doing, going west on the Transcontinental Railroad. And then another 3 weeks, because they kept going, by ship across the Pacific. So to go home was a major undertaking, and they did after Roxy's father died. So this poem imagines some of that. The Walnut Tree. 1. Before the bay freezes, the last California schooner brings a shipment, hundreds of pounds of black walnuts. We stack the crates in the storehouse. They won't sell since the Chinese merchants import cheaper ones. We'll eat walnuts for months, barter for crabs at market, give them away at Russian Christmas. We ship boxes home, sables, a china tea set, pearl bracelets. Nothing for father. I cannot believe he is dead. All his frowning at what he called our Siberian extravagance. Stiff-lipped letters, thick with questions. But didn't he mention me before he died? 2. In Maine, when the dusky smell of leaves thickened the air, father found his way by fence rails to the walnut tree. What did he see? Starry red suns on his eyelids, or the barn's blackness when you step in from noon's blaze? We leaned on its trunk, its ridged bark black as plowed earth in the rain, and listened to its waterfall of leaves. Once, grandfather planted a hatful of walnuts in rich bottomland soil. One husk, overlooked by squirrels, took root. Deep tap roots, father liked to say, won't stand a transplant like pine or cedar. A grandfather-granddaughter tree, the first crop of walnuts fattened the year I turned 10. 3. A walnut ripens in the dark, its shell tight as a soldered box, inside a stubborn husk that breaks only in a corn sheller or under loaded wagon wheels. We smashed with hammers, picked out the meats. The taste at last, crush of bitter oil between the teeth, half sweet, and a black flavor at the back of the mouth. 4. When I read to father History of Rome, we both saw the soldiers rippling behind hundreds of round leather shields. Through the ice months, we fed the wood stove while the old rich empire rotted from the inside. He liked to test my memory, though I forgot the generals' names and battlegrounds and failed to please him. But I could render that walnut tree. The bark looks like alligator skin, I'd begin. Even blacker this year, some grooves nearly purple. The green husks lie strewn in a wide circle that reaches beyond the shadows of the longest branches. 5. The bay is freezing us in. We filled the storehouse with enough tinned fruit to sell until spring. The crates of walnuts are unbearable. I want to ask my sister about father's will. Would she give me a strip of pasture along the east fence instead of the money he left me? She'll have to sell a few acres to pay his debts, maybe timber too. I fear she'll say I'm asking too much. Would she give me just the corner, the one with the walnut tree? More than anything, I long to have that old tree father was so fond of. one of the gifts of reading letters by an ancestor who was writing home to really communicate over years, and who was pretty honest at times, was that I got a sense of her range of character, or at least part of it. Who knows what the unwritten letters were? You know, I always wonder about that. Even for somebody who writes lots of letters, there's unwritten letters. But one thing that became clear is she wasn't exactly demure. Maybe that's why she was able to handle living in such a place, a sort of lawless frontier town. But I think she went a little farther than some people. Anyway, and some of the poems I've written in letter form, so this chronicles in my own way an anecdote that she told. Skirting the law. Dear sister, would you believe I hit a policeman yesterday? Racing to catch the mailboat with the banknote for father and our dog trotting at my hem. A sharp-nosed officer halted me. Nado na smichke. He gripped the poor chow's neck with a bony fist. Again. Nado na smichke. He must have a leash. Two-headed eagles glared from his buttons. I tightened my lips like purse strings to get the accents right. He does not need a leash. We have a law, votu no sakon. He sneered, cinching until the dog whimpered. You know I've had enough of their zakon. No firecrackers, no trespassing, their noose of taxes. You can sell rifles by the carload, but have to beg permission to stock a single typewriter. Murderers sink bodies in the bay, so why dig talons into me? Still, I faked tears, held out the thin envelope. Please, the ship will sail. But he pushed me aside, those gristly hands lunging at the dog. Oh, I burned to grip him by the neck. Everything turned red. I whacked him with my parasol, ran to the dock, and thrust the letter in a sailor's hands. Affectionately, your savage sister. And another element in the letters was a sense of what an international community Vladivostok was, still is very much. I actually had the privilege to go there back in '97 and get a sense of it, although of course it's quite changed too. So I think she had this feeling of learning all the time from different kinds of people who were serving as a mirror in a way for what they brought with them and didn't leave behind, you know, as Yankees, but also the ways they were adapting to a life in a new place. First frost, I'll give you a little winter, a little true Siberia. First frost. Late October, the wind smells of ice. A gauze of frost clings to the windows. With a paring knife, I wedge cotton into chinks, bear down to force the scraps against the wind. Wind chatters the latch, wails through cracks, throttles the door. Bad luck, the Chinese say. Your house stands on its steep lane with no building to stop the blast. Eerie, whistling, the wind knifes up from the bay to sink its clear teeth into the rooms. The wind is why no child comes to this house, whispers our Chinese clerk against his wrinkled hand. I cut batting from a roll, smooth it on the sill. We are all childless. My sister-in-law, married 18 years. Even Osaksan, whose cheeks are twin moons. Mother would call me heathen, to blame the wind. She writes, "It wasn't meant to be." Still, I think a baby resists a stormy place, the smell of gunpowder and departure in the air. Against the window, I tilt a frame of glass, pack glue in the seams, press down paper strips with my thumbs. I wish someone would build a house to block the wind. In 1 month, I will be 36. How long can we live in this empty lane? How long before the wind cuts through the panes to strip these rooms so quilted in white, clean? And another poem for Fred. Again, loosely based on an anecdote. Marriage. I wait until Fred goes out to feed the chickens before I sing Star Spangled Banner top of my lungs at the piano. He teaches himself to bicycle only in moonlight, so I can't laugh at how he wobbles the wheels. He's scared of the murderers in town, he admitted this morning, then circled my waist and kissed me until past time to unlock the store. Then avoided me all day. Nothing I say makes a difference. After he goes to bed, I watch the parlor lamp sputter. When I lean to kiss him in the dark, my lips touch something icy, like a corpse. I stifle a shout. Fred's laugh bursts from the goose down deep in the bed, his feet on the pillow. His hair sticking up like rooster feathers makes me laugh too, until his breath quivers my ear and he hurries his hands, opening his clothes so I can touch the heat of his skin. So I think I'll read two more. I wanted to read a poem from the Soviet period to speak to that time. We take so much for granted, freedom of expression and roofs over our heads and food in our bodies. It seems looking back out of our current time and place, this is just a hint of what others are experiencing severely, as we sit here. The poem is called Censor Letter. So this is the 1920s. Censor Letter. Dearest Sister, the American consulate closes in 2 days for good, so we will lose privilege of a private mail pouch. I received your letter yesterday, re-glued by the censor, still moist. Keep them short, for Lenin's minions won't read long ones. Just destroy them. I hope there's a hot kettle of fat in hell for each of them. I enclose a code for future letters. Write, lovely to receive your note, to say it reached you. The city crawls with checkpoints. Spies use any excuse to arrest a foreigner, a class enemy. We dare not discuss anything on the street but the weather, fearing even that will be suspect. People speak so softly, indoors or out, that I panic. My ears are going. Every night, carts and motor trucks rumble down Svetlanskaya, carting what? I don't know. Guns? More guards? It all looks black, black. Do not worry about me. The Soviets are just one more set of claws to get around. I must ship valuables out of town fast as I can. They may claim everything. In the parlor, we pried a board from the wall to hide rifles and silver for black market. It's hard to ignore rumors. Have faith in God. Do not send presents. The censor will keep what he likes and seize any book suspecting a code. Please, though this letter goes to Maine, be careful. Do not let it fall into strange hands. The arms of these red spiders are long. Show it to Auntie, then burn it. This is my last plain word. And I thought I'd end with a poem that documents an unusual experience she had in her early 40s. They had in the later years a place in the country that she often wrote about. And one time she wrote about a kind of mystical experience that she had there. It's a wonderful reminder to me, this story of, again, all that have come before us, and, well, all the untold stories too. I mean, it's really amazing that, if you think about it, that we're here at all, you know. All the near misses, you know, those who escaped disease, or those who bore the burden of grief over having lost others who succumbed. People living through wars, lack of food. It's amazing. But then on the really positive side, on what really carries us to, the experiences that people have had sort of in the depth of their heart. This is perhaps one of the greatest gifts of all her letters, that I know she had this experience. But thinking of it, I think of all the others who had amazing experiences, right? All the stories that we don't know. And they're in us somehow, I think. So, The Far Shore. Dear sister, yesterday an amazing thing happened. I started out climbing toward the woods to pick gribi, wild mushrooms, or violets, then veered down to the bay, the sea drawn out, low tide. My footprints pointed east, west, Vostok, Zapat. A light breeze, its fragrance of seaweed and minerals like Maine, but stronger. On the warm sand, I lay down. A thin mist poured salt over everything. The sand, my skin, the mussel shells. What happened, I don't know. I didn't fall asleep, but my breath rose and fell in slow waves. I felt that something lay on the sand, but it was not me, as if I were the sand, with no human hopes or fears. Calm swelled in me, and for a few moments, a perfect faith. It really seemed I was with God. And if you can believe, Clara, that the soul might briefly leave the body, I think that is what happened. If only I could have kept that feeling. I can't put it on paper. Later, at the dacha, Fred returned with 3 snipe in hand. How could I tell him, fearing he'd make light of it? Someday I hope to let him know. Can you understand how I long for those moments on that shore, whatever they were, to make me something better, something more generous? Thank you.
Sophie, can you talk a little bit about the process of writing and how you were in Vladivostok in '97? So you were thinking about it then. Can you, I mean, is there more that you could tell us about?
I probably wrote the bulk of the poems, or at least the first drafts, in '97. And I guess I would say it started with the letters and just trying to learn the story. There were some anecdotes in my family, but I really didn't know the scope of the story until I started reading the letters. And I started reading them in '94, '95. And going over there gave me a chance to go see some of the places where she had lived. It was an interesting process. It really moved from the letters to copying down things that fascinated me. I mean, I should say that one of the people I should thank is my aunt, to whom the book is dedicated, who was so inspired by the letters, she started typing them up. And actually, she's been working with a professor to get them edited because they're of historical interest in their own right. That helped me a lot. I could move a lot faster. You know, the letters are on this onion skin, you know, with the looping script. I mean, it's very laborious to read just one, 6-pager. So I could go more quickly that way. Anyway, so I started with copying down the passages I loved and writing my thoughts about it and images, and some of my own stuff was coming in there, and then doing sort of more research to fill in gaps. And I started the collection in third person. Really wrote most of what became the final poems in third person, and then kept filling in the gaps more and more, and eventually got bold enough to move into first person. So they really evolved over a number of years. I can't even say where the letters end and they begin. Most of the language is my own, but I know some of her own words and phrases slip in there. Yeah, it was a long process in this particular case, compared to some poems that just sort of come. There weren't too many of these that just.
It says you teach in the Boston area. Is it one of the schools here in Concord?
Oh, let's see. I've taught quite a bit at Concord Carlisle Adult Education, mostly adult education programs, and do private workshops in my home.
I know that she had written probably many letters. How, I know you had probably, maybe hundreds, tons of letters. How did you choose what to focus on? What, was it organic? Did you say, oh, this letter I want to focus on, or was it just a process of reading the letters and kind of letting it kind of simmer inside you? I mean, because it must have been tons of letters. How did you know what to focus on?
There were. It was a little overwhelming at times.
Yeah.
Best is when they sort of chose me, like a story or a letter just wouldn't let me go. I mean, isn't that the best way for anything?
Get a hold of you and you finally surrender. But I think it was, in general, a process of letting it steep. In some cases, I felt it was important for the scope of the story to really try to have a poem on a certain subject, but sometimes they didn't come. I really wanted to have a poem in there about her daughter. They had one daughter in 1906, which obviously you wouldn't know from hearing First Frost. And I had one little anecdote, which I'll just mention, which is very sweet, that Fred, I don't think men were really in the delivery room back in 1906, or not too much, as fathers to be. So he took it on his shoulders to go down to the consulate, which was still around at that time, and get the American flag and make sure it was up at the foot of the bed, so that when their child was born, you know, on foreign land, they would see the stars and stripes. But so I thought, oh, there's a beginning. I mean, what an image! You know, Fred running, you know, maybe he was, you know, running out of time. You know, and thought, oh, she'll come before I get the flag. But it wasn't kind of enough for a poem, you know, maybe a haiku, but not enough to came around it. It just sort of seemed like this little anecdote. So I just throw my hands up. I said, well, there's not. But in other cases, the muse or whatever was a little more cooperative, and I really wanted a poem, you know, to give some piece of the story, and eventually, you know, found something knitted itself to something else. Yes.
Flag story makes me think some countries, if your country's flag flies over the hospital, you can be the citizen of that country. Like Italy is one of those.
Is that true?
Yeah. So that he may have wanted this baby to be American, which leads me to my question, why did they stay?
That's a great question. I'd love to be able to hear her answer in her own voice. But I will say, just as a sort of historical footnote, they were American citizens and never gave up their citizenship. So my grandmother, who was born there in 1906, who is still alive, was an American. And because Fred was from across the river in Somersworth, New Hampshire, she went to the University of New Hampshire, tuition free. I mean, that's how much they were considered American citizens. So that's sort of amazing after all those years. And why they stayed, well, I think there was many reasons, but I'll just say a few, and that was, it was a really good life there for them. They were living as merchants. I didn't read a poem from earlier in the book, but she had been a bookkeeper in a sawmill, and her sweetheart didn't inherit the family farm, and her sister, who stayed back in Maine that she wrote letters to, was a teacher in the schools. They were merchants. I mean, this is, you know, sending home the pearl bracelets, you know, I mean, I made that up, but that was the gist. I mean, they really moved into a different life. She was a lady of leisure and had this really interesting international community of friends. Some Swedes. She had a friend who was a Russian doctor. They would take walks on the hills and talk about literature and stuff. They'd argue about the merits of the American Poe versus Lermontov and so on. So she really lived this rich life there, and I think that combined with her love of the landscape and just the beauty of the place was part of it. And I also think once she had been there for a certain amount of time and had that richness of life, there was a way that she couldn't go back. I had that sense in what I do have from that visit in 1902 that already she was so far from Berwick, Maine, you know. She was so cosmopolitan and just saw such a larger world there. She persisted even, Fred sadly died in the early 1920s, but she stayed. She stayed until 1930, 7 years without Fred in the household. By then her daughter was in boarding school in Shanghai actually, so that she could learn some English. So that's a testament, the fact that she lived you know, not just with censorship, but rations and really difficult circumstances, you know, both sort of personally and just sort of physically, is a testament to how much she loved the place. She really didn't go until she lost her job. You know, she got a job in the 20s. And when that firm was closed down, it was the last foreign firm. She was a bookkeeper again. I didn't read, anyway. She just had no other way of sort of feeding herself, so. Then she went down to Shanghai and joined family down there. So, but it's still with all those facts, I sort of say how extraordinary. She stayed. She loved that place. Yeah.
Did she continue the business after her husband died?
Actually, the business really didn't continue after the revolution. It wasn't a place for Americans to have a business. So, actually, Fred went to work on the consulate for a little while, and then she eventually worked as a bookkeeper. So they moved on, yeah.
Sophie, you had that dream in the beginning when you first got the letters, and I'm wondering if there were other dreams that came as you were working on the poems that seemed connected, or any sense of contact with her, or dreams that told you more.
Oh, it's a wonderful question.
I was thinking how amazing it must be that, you know, we don't know where your great-grandmother is, but that someone should give this much attention, someone in one's family would give so much attention to one's life. We don't ever expect that.
Yeah. Well, I certainly had other dreams. None were quite as vivid and directly about her in my experience, which felt kind of archaeological in a sense through the letters. But I will say, as I worked, I had a photograph of her, and we're lucky to have photographs that were also saved. She was good about just using the mail. I mean, she could see where things were going, and she just shipped stuff to people. She said, hang on to this. And one of them is of her at her writing desk, and I had it above mine. And I think the more I worked on the project and came into writing more, because this is, you know, the sort of the beginning of my life as a writer, I mean, really giving my best energy to it, I had this sense that, a gratitude for her, that in some way, well, in many ways, she's a writer, but in some way, I was carrying something on. You know, her writing came in letters, and I have a sense of, well, both to be able to tell her story to others, you know, beyond her family that were getting the letters, but also for myself. So I think I had a sense of that. I don't know, almost a thread between us, you know, that sense. And again, I'm very conscious, it's just because of the blessing and the good fortune that they were saved.
Yes, that's
But those
amazing.
threads exist, whether we know it's there or not. They're in us, right? They're they're in us. But to know it is an additional blessing, I think. To feel that thread and to feel her.
Do you resemble
Say
her
yes.
physically in any way?
Wow, it's probably hard to tell from the front of the book what she looks like. In the scheme of things,
Yeah?
yeah,
Okay.
loosely. I'd love to say yes, splitting image. But, yeah. Splitting, yeah.
Sophie, it was so wonderful to hear you read, and I felt like I was right there when you were reading it. And also, talking about the snippets of the story as it expanded, I thought it was material for several volumes. Just a beautiful experience they had, and how she stayed on political references. And it was very good. Did she come back to Maine or New Hampshire?
Well, interestingly, I said she went down to Shanghai and lived with her family. Her daughter actually married an American man who had been in the Navy. And they settled in Shanghai, which wasn't that as outrageous as it might sound, given that there was quite a vibrant American and also British population in that city. It was really a good kind of wildlife in the 20s. They had their own roaring 20s over there. And of course there was a tradition of missionaries as well in that area. Anyway, that's its own story. But that was another place they stayed, and really a little too long. They were there into World War II, and I don't think they ever thought things would get as bad as they did. But they did, and the American and British civilians that were there were put into prisoner of war camps, as Japanese were here, of course. So they were in a camp for 9 months. My mother actually was born in Shanghai, and she and her twin sister, and my aunt, the one to whom the book is dedicated, who was a teenager at the time, whereas my mother was just 2, were in the camp. So that's another part of the story. That's maybe like volume 2. In any case, they were traded as prisoners of war and came back in a famous exchange on the Swedish vessel, the Gripsholm, in 43. And they came back to California, where my grandfather's family was from, and sort of really started over. I think that's part of why they'd been reluctant to leave, is because they had established themselves in Shanghai. They started over in California. And my great-grandmother Roxy stayed with them. She did the visit back to Maine, and the letters from that time are really like, you really get the sense that she almost just didn't quite feel, not only did she feel like it was a dress that didn't fit, but you know, in a way there wasn't really a place for her, as by then she was in her late 70s. So she stayed with her daughter's family. But when they were back in the U.S. for good after that. And the other anecdote I just have to tell you, because this isn't in the book, is she was writing, it wasn't, you know, like you might think of a concentration camp. This is a prisoner of war camp where they had some materials and they smuggled some things in and so on. So she had paper. And she, being a writer, was writing the whole time she's in the camp. Nothing good about the Japanese. Right around. I think this was sort of like survival for her on some level, you know, writing. And she lost so much weight in the camp. She had sort of gained her weight back while in Shanghai, and was a pretty portly woman. But she lost so much weight in the camp that she decided on exiting the camp during this famous exchange. She would stuff all of the writings under her corset and try to get them out, because you know she had chronicled everything. And my aunt tells a story, who's a teenager, you know, how they had like this inspection station and they're all lined up to get inspected. And my aunt says you could just hear Roxy, or Granny as she called her, crinkling, like every step was like crinkle, every step. You know, my aunt says they're all going to be shot. I mean, she's sure of it, you know, she's like, you know, saying her last rites. And apparently they get up to the inspector. You can just imagine the scene. These guards and people are just, everything's being looked over, and she just sort of looked at them. You can imagine from some of the poems. And she said, "You're not going to make an old lady like me undress." And you know the Japanese and how they revere the elderly. That's just it. So she passed by crinkle. And then as soon as they get to California, she gives it all to the newspapers, and it's printed up like diaries smuggled out of Jap camp. You know, you can imagine. She loved it. I mean, she really loved it. So she was a character, yeah.
Yes.
So that's the end of that part of the story. Yes.
Did she ever get to see the walnut tree again? Did she ever?
Yes, she would have gotten, I don't remember her mentioning it, but I'm sure that would have been one of her first stops when she went to see her sister. That probably provided some solace, the land, for whatever way.
Did she get that land?
She, I don't remember that she did get it, sadly, although she did, I don't think she got that Cornish, she got a little bit of land. But it was so odd with her being elsewhere. It was really much more sort of nostalgic for her. You know, it wasn't a place that she could, you know, go build a house. And, yeah, it's really in the way it is for us, you know, something I think she was just holding in her heart.
There's one more question, then I think we should break.
Yes.
How cold is Siberia?
Very.
Did she talk about the weather a lot? Was that a big part of her life?
It was, but as you might not imagine, the summers were brutally hot and humid. Yeah. I mean, and I've been there. It was. I mean, you just sweat. They call them fish days. I forget the Russian for fish days, but where you can just barely breathe. You just feel like you're not in your element. So they had the real extremes, and yeah, I mean, the ice was this huge event when it came, and the harbor froze, and the mail stopped. It was like everything stopped.
Everything stops.
Yeah, and it was very much a feeling of being cut off from the world, I think.
And
And really in peril, sometimes just going outside.
And how long did that last? For how long?
Well, that would have been from, you know, the end of October through, gosh, I think like the end of April.
So pretty much like here.
Yeah, pretty much like here, exactly. Aren't we glad? Yeah, the snow is finally melted, yeah. So we know a little, know what that feels like, yeah. So thank you all. Thank you very much.